things actually. It's a very fascinating field. Basically, the sternum is open, abdomen is open, and then the infrarenal aorta is looped. And it's a beautiful operation for all surgical PGs to be involved in. If anybody is interested in getting some exposure to this, please do contact me or my colleagues. We'll be very happy to get you all involved. You get some fantastic exposure to retroperitoneal and abdominal and thoracic anatomy. So you perfuse the organs, and then you take out the organs one by one. Generally, the lungs and the heart are taken out first, and then the liver, the kidneys, and the pancreas. And the organ is preserved in the various techniques of preservation. The old technique was actually static preservation, where you preserve the organ, in a plastic bag surrounded by fluid. But nowadays, there are certain machines in which the human circulation is actually mimicked. And it is either mimicked during the warm phase or cold phase, normothermic machine perfusion, hypothermic or cold machine perfusion, which increases the bench life of the organs. We used to have that in India, which is called the Organox machine, which was made by the University of Cambridge. And there's another one called Transmedics, which is made in North America, which might be available in India. But there are some ways, certain situations where you can use them. And this is how the organ is preserved until it goes to the hospital where the recipient is there. And then the organ comes out of this machine. And then as far as liver is concerned, I think the important thing to remember is that it's actually an orthotopic transplant, just like the heart and the lungs are. So you got to take out, it is placed in the same position as the native organ, unlike the kidney or the pancreas, for example, where they can be placed in other places. Heterotopic. So there's orthotopic. So you need to take out the old liver, which is the explant or the recipient hepatectomy. That is a very, very critical part of the operation. And then the graft, which is either a whole liver or split liver. I think it's important to mention it here for the PGs. The whole liver can actually be split into two. And they can be used in two different recipients actually. We've done that 3-4 times here in Bangalore. We can use it for an adult and for a child, or for two medium-sized adults. So increasing the utility of the organ. We just talked about utility of deceased donor organs. So that can be done. And then as Ravi Shankar sir was mentioning, nowadays the standard is a piggyback, whereby you don't really excise the donor cava. There are various technical and physiological reasons for that. You want to maintain the kidney circuit perfusion, venous return going to the heart. In earlier days, we used to use veno-venous bypass, and we used to interrupt the cava. But now we can safely do this using piggyback technique, where we can clamp the cava, and the anesthetist, can maintain the venous return by various techniques and continue to maintain hemodynamics while we do a cavo-caval anastomosis. And generally nowadays we prefer to do the portal vein and then the artery, and reperfuse using the portal blood, and then do the artery. In some situations, we do use the artery first, which is, for example, in non-heart beating donors, which is cardiac death donation. I won't go into that. That's, maybe we can have a chat about organ donation at a later date. So this is a situation where you retrieve organs from a donor whose heart has stopped beating, as opposed to a brain dead donor where the brain is not working, but the heart is still functional. And so non-heart beating donors, that is another concept, and that can be done. In those situations, we use the artery first anastomosis, and then the bile duct is done. What I would say at this point is that, rather than me discussing about all this, I would direct the PGs and whoever is interested to a website which is called the University of Toronto website. There they have some fantastic animation of extremely complex GI and other non-GI operations, where PGs will be able to get it. So these are all 10-minute videos of the CT scan and the operations, and graphics. You'll get really fantastic. If anybody is interested, they want to come and see the transplants with us, they're very welcome.
Rajiv, what is the incidence of biliary stricture if you do the caval anastomosis first, or even the retrograde anastomosis first?
So biliary, strictures around about 5 to 10%, sir, nowadays. In deceased donor transplants, 5%. In living donor liver transplants, because you're using half a graft, and because there is a lot of dissection which happens around the porta, and then the organ is being preserved, the strictures are around 5 to 10%. But in deceased donor transplants, 5% the risk of biliary ischemia and stricturing is slightly higher, around about 10%. So,
And is it also true that if you have got cardiac problems, then you try to do the arterial anastomosis first and then the caval anastomosis? Is that right? Because
sir, in the
caval anastomosis tends to flood the pulmonary circulation and cardiac.
Yeah, that used, so yes, sir, that certainly, that concept, people used to follow that concept earlier, but nowadays, because the anesthetists are so much better able to maintain hemodynamics,
Yeah.
they have some fantastic monitoring, transesophageal echo, and they're able to monitor, cardiac output and the system. They're able to calculate systemic vascular resistance. Lot of cardiothoracic monitoring has come into, this liver transplant basically general surgical operation, and it's coming to general surgery, and they can monitor various things like lung water. They can monitor things like, pulmonary vascular resistance without need for Swan-Ganz and things like that. In days gone by, I'm sure Dr. Ashik Reddy will tell us a little bit more during the lung discussion. People would say, oh, you should put a Swan-Ganz and things like that. Nowadays, they're able to do that. They use transesophageal echo, and they use 2 arterial lines, one in the radial, or 2 radial, 1 radial, 1 femoral, and they're able to calculate so many parameters, and they're able to maintain patients extremely well. They get so much information about patient physiology. I think we were discussing a few of this during the sepsis talk. And these things are even used in ICUs as well nowadays to actually, resuscitate patients. And basically that's what it is. When you do a liver transplant, and there's so much of hemodynamic disturbance. So they're able to maintain all that. So minor changes in the technique don't really have such a big impact nowadays. Okay. So what we do, we have standardized the operation. So you do the cava first, you do the portal vein first, you reperfuse, then you do the artery, then you do the bile duct. And the anesthetists are able to sort out all the most important physiology. The perioperative physicians, we like to call them perioperative physicians. They look after the patient during anesthesia and also up to extubation. The same team looks after. Yeah. So in that way, we surgeons are able to focus. And what has happened is the operation has become so much more standardized. So, for example, in our unit, everybody does the caval anastomosis, portal vein, artery, bile duct in the same manner. Yeah. So you keep doing it again and again and again, and so you get better at it, and results get better at it, rather than we keep changing things. So that's one particular aspect which I want to emphasize, especially in complex surgery. You keep doing it, you keep doing it again and again and again. I mean, there are only 2-3 different decision making things that you need to do, and then the whole team gets better at it. I think that's very important in things like transplant. Okay, Indraja, continue.
Yes.
Any questions from the PGs so far? I think I'm trying to get, because this is a complex topic and this is a first year student, so she won't be able to explain a lot of these things. So I'm just involving Rajiv much more than I would usually have, but I think that is for the benefit of the postgraduates. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Indraja, continue.
Yes, sir. And the complications include hemorrhagic and vascular complications.
A little bit louder, ma.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And the complications include hemorrhagic, vascular, and biliary complications. In hemorrhage, in order to prevent hemorrhage, to pack the peritransplant area for 2 to 3 days to achieve adequate hemostasis. And vascular complications include hepatic artery thrombosis. It can be spontaneous or due to the acute rejection. Most commonly, it is seen in pediatric recipients and in adults with primary sclerosing cholangitis. It can be diagnosed by Doppler ultrasonography or angiography. Once it is confirmed, we have to do urgent retransplantation. And biliary complications, and nowadays stenosis is the most common problem compared to the biliary leak, and it usually occurs within first few months after transplantation, and it can be managed by endoscopic dilatation and stunting or by surgical correction. And the outcomes of the liver transplantation is depends upon the underlying liver disease, and best results are seen in patient with chronic liver disease. As a transplantation, as a result of acute liver failure, have higher mortality, and patients undergo transplantation for tumor have very good outcome, but there is a chance of recurrent malignancy. And transplantation after hepatitis B or hepatitis C infection, there may be chance of graft failure because of the recurrence of the viral disease. Can I continue, sir?
Yeah. Rajiv, anything, final comments on the complications and say the other thing is the other aspect that has come in very big is the medication for rejection after liver transplantation. I think Rajiv already alluded to that in the last class, but especially in patients who have been transplanted for malignancies, I think the tacrolimus should be tapered off to a low dose as soon as possible, and then if you need to add, you can add everolimus or something, and then other rejection medication, so that it reduces the risk of tumor recurrence as far as HCC is concerned, and also tumor that is related to rejection medication, the immunosuppression medication. Rajiv,
Yes,
final
sir.
word on complication.
Yeah, yes, sir. I think the thing to say is that there is tremendous advances in perioperative care, in surgical technique, surgical instrumentation. Have really helped illumination. For example, we use loops routinely, we use headlights routinely. We have borrowed a lot of principles from vascular surgery. All this has helped a lot. Optics, everything. And for example, ultrasound, different techniques of ultrasound. We surgeons do ultrasound now. We can pick up complications earlier. So all this have helped to reduce complications. Number two is that because of accessibility of transplantation, more and more units are doing it, and more people are getting. So generally, people are getting better at doing them. And thirdly, I think there is a lot of things in the medication, post-op medication, which are actually improving post-transplant outcome. And we know so much more about the metabolism, post-transplant physiology, and medications are definitely improving a lot. So transplant is actually joint surgical medical exercise. So it cannot be done just by a surgeon or a physician alone. So it's done in a team consisting of physicians and surgeons. And so surgeons need to know as much about medicine as physicians know about the surgical ideas, surgical principles. So certainly a lot of medicine goes into this. I'll just leave it at this.
Okay. I think Indraja, go to lung
Yes.
transplantation now and do the small bowel later.
Ravi, it is important for our PGs to know the lung, liver, not the lung, liver, pancreas, small bowel, other anastomosis.
Yeah.
Lung transplant is really not required for our PGs.
Okay.
I will conclude it at the end. Let us go through the series. Small bowel
right.
transplant.
Okay, right, ma.
Don't disturb her.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir. And small bowel transplantation, it is now in recent days it is now well established therapy for highly selected patients, and the need for small bowel transplantation is 0.5 to 1 patients per million population. And in these, there is a strong graft rejection because of the presence of large amounts of the lymphoid tissue. And uh, it is a treatment of option for a patient with intestinal failure and who requires a long-term parenteral nutrition. And the causes of intestinal failure includes like intestinal atresia, necrotizing enterocolitis, or disorders of the motility, or mesenteric infection, or Crohn's disease, or valvulus. In case of small bowel transplantation, the superior mesenteric artery of the graft is anastomosed to the recipient aorta, and the superior mesenteric vein is anastomosed to the inferior vena cava or to the side of the portal vein. And then the proximal end of the small bowel graft is anastomosed to the recipient jejunum or duodenum, and the distal graft is anastomosed to side of the colon, or it can brought as an ileostomy. So,
Yeah, continue.
yes, sir. And pancreatic transplantation, the pancreatic transplantation, it restores the normal control of the glucose metabolism, and it obviates the need for the insulin therapy in patients with diabetes mellitus. There are different types of pancreas transplantation. It includes simultaneous pancreas and kidney transplantation, and pancreas after kidney transplantation, and pancreas transplantation alone. And it was pancreas transplantation. It was first done by Lilly in 1966. The pancreatic graft is placed intraperitoneally in the pelvis, usually on the right side, and kidney graft is placed on the left side. And the donor vessels of the pancreas graft is anastomosed to the recipient iliac vessels, and exocrine secretions are dealt with by anastomosing the graft duodenum to the small bowel, or sometimes duodenum may be anastomosed to the bladder. The complications of the pancreas transplantation, it includes early and vascular thrombosis of the graft and duodenal anastomotic leaks, and wound infection occurs in up to 10% of the patients, and intra-abdominal infection is common. And the specific complications of enteric drainage include intra-abdominal sepsis and adhesive small bowel obstruction. And transplantation of the isolated pancreatic islets. Uh, uh, Treatment of the diabetes by transplantation of islet cells, islets of Langerhans, is more attractive concept nowadays, and the potential complications of the exocrine pancreas can be avoided by this one. The pancreatic islets are obtained mechanically by disrupting the pancreas after injection of the collagenase into the pancreatic duct. The islets are then purified from dispersed tissue by density gradient centrifugation and can be delivered into the recipient liver by the injection into the portal vein. Can I continue, sir?
Yeah, I think Rajiv, I don't anybody has much experience with pancreas. Do you do pancreas as well? And what is your views on that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do pancreas. We've done a few. I just want to say a few things. There's one or two things to say about small bowel is that I won't go into too much of detail. Small bowel is an extremely complicated transplant because there are a lot of immunological issues. The first thing to say. Secondly, patients need to be prepared for small bowel transplant very, very carefully. And the third thing is that small bowel transplants generally are a part of a multivisceral complex, and
Yeah.
that's the best, like basically stomach, pancreas, small bowel with liver or without liver. So they're generally a part of those transplants. And fourthly, they need to be done in the setup for these type of transplants need to be much, much, much more mature than that needed for a liver transplant. Liver is a very, very hardy organ. It's an absolutely fantastic organ to deal with, and immunological complications are very, very less with liver transplants. So I'll just leave small bowel at that. And certainly it needs to be done as a part of a much, much, much bigger, much, much mature GI group than we have at the minute. It certainly will happen, in India and in our places in the coming few years. Certainly few isolated transplants are being done. We did one in our group, and patient did reasonably well for a short period of time. Pancreas transplants, we do much more of that. We do around about 6 to 8 transplants a year. We need to choose the grafts very carefully, choose the patients very carefully. Generally, the indication is a diabetic patient who has got renal failure, where you do a pancreas and kidney simultaneously. This is called an SPK transplant. You can do pancreas after kidney, whereas you in basically where somebody gets a kidney donor, a living donor, and then you do a pancreas later, or you do a pancreas alone transplant very, very rarely. And islets as well can be done. However, we need to always remember the surgical principles. What is the alternative treatment method that is available for somebody with diabetes? Now, for example, you have lots of fantastic treatment options. For example, insulin pumps are available, and the insulin pumps can give very, very tight control of diabetes. So islet transplant being done isolated, the results are all very, very, they're all still in the developmental stages. I'm sure they'll get better as years come by. But at the minute, you always need to think about what's the alternative treatment that's available before jumping into this. And certainly the exam, I would give a balanced answer about comparing this with other treatments available before hanging my hat on a particular technique.
Sir, but
So that's
other
all.
thing is, that's good. Other thing students have to understand is metabolic and bariatric surgery has obviated the need for pancreas transplant to a large extent, because there is significant improvement in that, and that helps to maybe reduce the need for pancreas transplant as well. And though the islet cell transplant is a very attractive option, somehow it has not taken off in the way everyone expected. My close friend, this one Yogesh Kudwa, again is in Mayo Clinic. He is
Hmm.
one of the pioneers in this islet cell transplant, but it has not taken off in a big way. Okay,
Yeah.
now come to heart and lung now.
Yes, sir.
What are the results of this islet cell transplant?
I am not.
So I'll just say a few words before we go into thoracic transplant. So basically, the engraftment of these islets are only in the region of 30 to 40%. So there are lots of challenges. First one is in the purity of the islets. Lots of different pancreases. Sometimes from one pancreas we will not get enough islets to actually transplant into somebody to maintain euglycemia, because because of the yield of the islet cells. It depends upon the pancreas quality and various things. Number one. Number two is the vector which is used along with the islets. Some people use viruses, some people use hydrophilic chemicals, and also the site of engraftment, whether it's the liver or it's somewhere else, that matters a lot. And number three, the immune response to the islets becomes very high, and so the number of islets which are left after a few weeks might become very, 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 very few. And the only attractive option is that you can keep giving them more and more islets, but unfortunately the problem is that you sensitize them, and then the subsequent islets that you give get lost.
Yeah.
So very, very attractive field, for researchers and things, and also to read, but practically in the clinical setting, lots of challenges.
Okay. Continue, Indraja.
Move on.
Yes. Yes. And Bruce E. Reeds performed first successful combined heart-lung transplantation in 1981. The heart-lung transplantation has to be performed through median sternotomy incision. Single and double lung transplantation are effective therapy for selective patients with end-stage chronic lung disease. The indications of lung transplantation includes pulmonary fibrosis, pulmonary hypertension, emphysema, and cystic fibrosis. The single
Just a
lung
minute. Go
transplantation.
back, Ma. Go back.
Yes, sir.
See I think, no, the second slide. I
Yes,
think
sir.
the indications have changed. I think Rajshekhar will come to that. I
Yes.
think pulmonary
Cystic
hypertension.
fibrosis.
Yeah.
Cystic
Yes, sir.
fibrosis is the commonest
Fib-
indication for lung transplantation even today. Primary
Okay.
pulmonary hypertension, where you subject them to pulmonary endarterectomy and then that is not successful, then requiring transplantation comes next.
Yes, sir.
Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis comes next.
Yes, sir.
Interstitial lung disease, bar emphysema, end stage lung disease, who cannot be managed even with home oxygen comes next.
Yes.
Of course, COVID fibrous lung comes next. Cystic
Yes.
fibrosis is the commonest indication.
Commonest indication.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Rajshekhar, with pulmonary hypertension, now with the very good medication available and majority of these
Yeah.
patients be maintained very well, the need for transplantation has come down. Is that correct?
Come down, Allah. If that is when you diagnose them, if the patients come at an early stage, you diagnose at an early stage. But if they come with an established pulmonary hypertension, where primary pulmonary hypertension, many of them do well after pulmonary endarterectomy, which is again like you take out the thickened endothelium of these pulmonary trunks. If that is also not successful, then they only think of transplantation. That indication is very, very less, very few patients.
Okay. Continue, Indraja.
Yes, sir. And the single lung transplantation has to be performed through posterolateral thoracotomy, and double lung transplantation has to be done through bilateral thoracotomy or median sternotomy incision. During lung transplantation, the donor pulmonary veins on the left atrial curve are anastomosed to the recipient left atrium. And then next, bronchial anastomosis and pulmonary arterial anastomosis to be done. And the outcomes in the lung transplantation, there is a 1 and 5-year graft survival rates after heart transplantation are around 85 and 70%, and the results after heart and lung transplantation are less good. There is 1-year survival rates of around 75% and 5-year survival rates of around 50%. sir.
Okay.
Yes.
I think Rajshekhar will highlight that. I think basically the mortality now, accepted mortality in good units is about 5, post-operative mortality is about 5%, and 5-year survival, 1-year survival is about 80 to 85%. I don't know about the 5-year survival for lung. It is dropped down to some 35 to 40%, I think, usually.
Okay.
Are there
Okay.
separate indications for single and double lung transplant?
Yeah, okay.
Raj-
Indra, just stop at this stage. I would just keep this in mind. Liver transplant, kidney transplant, there are options of a live donor. That's why those transplants have picked up so well. It is so much more advanced in terms of surgical technique, in terms of post-operative immunotherapy, recognizing the complications, etc., etc. In the heart and lung transplantation, the donor is always a brain dead patient. There is no question of live donor, especially in the heart. Only one Japanese surgeon tried live related lung donor. They have done about only 18 cases, and they also stopped it because the lung, retrieving the lung from a healthy normal lung, even a smallest complication can lead to morbidity and mortality. So they literally stopped it. So heart and lung donor has to be a brain dead, especially the lungs. Although you see so many brain dead patients with 2 lungs in each patient, by the time the brain death is declared, they are intubated, on ventilator for some time, possibly with the infections. Although you get 2 lungs from each brain death, the suitable number of lungs for transplantation is less than 5%.
Yeah.
So
That's
the
a very
techniques
important
have
point.
not evolved as much as liver transplant or kidney transplant. Success rate is not as much of kidney and liver is because of these limitations. To only know this much, that's enough.
Yes. Okay.
Are there separate indications for single and the double lung transplant?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, you are right.
Oh.
So this taking one lobe from one person and another lobe from another person and transplanting is
Like you have a child with cystic fibrosis, you take the left lower lobe from the mother and put it into one chest cavity of a child. That is what is live donor transplant done by only one team in Japan.
Japan. Okay.
They stopped at around 18 cases.
Okay.
Because 18th case ended up in some complications and they didn't have the morale to continue doing the 19th and 20th case.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay. Right, Indraja, have you finished?
No, sir. Two more
Continue.
slides, sir. Yes, sir. And safe living following solid organ transplantation. It is an integrated care that starts before transplant, like prevention of the infection by vaccination, food and water safety, and travel advice. And the pre and post vaccination against hepatitis B, A, and pneumococcal vaccines has to be given. And like proper washing of the hands, avoiding of the crowded areas, close contact with persons with respiratory viruses, that has to be in mind. And the outcomes of the organ transplantation is closely protected by the education before, during, and after transplantation about the potential risks and measure to mitigate such exposures. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I think that was a very good.
Must.
Yes, Rajshekhar.
Yeah, Nila, very well presented, very brief knowledge about transplantation, much needed. I don't think any other hospital teaches to this level. Thank you, Ravi and Lakshman, for organizing such teaching topics.
Thank you. Okay, Rajiv, final
Yes, sir.
comment. Final comment. Thank you very much for your active participation and your knowledge and the way you elucidated